What's up, everybody? So I didn't have this on my bingo card. There is currently a lawsuit going on between Ken Kratz and the creators of Convicting a Murderer. I have all the filings here. Let's go over them. Let's just jump right into it. The first one is Exhibit 1, Convicting a Murderer, working title. This is the Letter of Understanding. This Letter of Understanding, signed January 15th, 2018, precedes a long-form agreement to be signed February 1st, 2018. This agreement is between Transition Studios, an Ohio limited liability corporation located at, I won't read the address, the producers, and Ken Kratz of, won't read that either, and on behalf of his team. Both parties agree to the following. Producers will create a docuseries which may become a season of Making a Murderer. The producers will create a docuseries which may become a season of Making a Murderer. So it looks like they were initially trying to make an additional season of Making a Murderer, but will address the police and prosecutors' points of view into the Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey cases. Furthermore, it will explore the lengths to which Avery fans reached out to destroy the lives of the project's subjects. Producers are responsible for funding the film. The budget figure is capped at $2.5 million, and any overage may not be recouped, and any proceeds over and above the budget after delivery costs and commissions are considered net profits divisible to stakeholders. Sean Reck has creative control and final cut of the project. Now this, whereas a lot of people gets confused, Candace Owens had nothing to do with the Convicting a Murderer documentary. It was finished way before she was ever inserted as the host, and that was pretty much the only role she had. It was licensed or sold to the Daily Wire, and then Candace Owens was put in place as the host, and that's it. That's pretty much the only involvement she had in the film, in the documentary. Subject, Ken Kratz, is a stakeholder and will receive 25% of net profits. Profits are to be paid within 7 days of receipt of funds. Producers will eventually transfer all IP to a standalone entity, and that entity will assume obligations in this deal. Producers will purchase errors and omissions insurance of at least $1 million per occurrence and $3 million aggregate, and name Ken Kratz as additionally insured. Producers will advance Ken Kratz $25,000 by February 15th, 2018, recoupable from his net profits upon liquidity, event, sale, or licensing. Producers may pay Ken Kratz producers will pay Ken Kratz $4,000 per month consulting fee for 20 months beginning on or before March 1st, 2018. Ken Kratz will be a 1099 contractor. Producers agree to pay the Ken Kratz team $85,000 upon the sale of the film. Producers agree to make their best effort to hire as many team members as possible into the production. Producer is the executive rights holder of Ken Kratz's story and any executive evidence for purposes or film or television in perpetuity. Producers will advance Ken Kratz $5,000 by March 1st toward existing Avery and any forthcoming Dassey adaptation of book rights or scripted films, with $45,000 due to fully execute rights. This must be fully paid by February 1st, 2020. Ken Kratz will share in producers' profits of any scripted dramatic production at what's considered a reasonable industry standard percentage to be negotiated later. Ken Kratz will make his best effort to be available to media for promotion for this documentary project's release. Producer will pay any expenses related to media appearances, and this is signed by both Sean Reck and Ken Kratz. I just closed it. The next one here is the, what is this one called? Ken Kratz, the plaintiff in the complaint filed on this date, Thursday, the 20th of March, 2025, in the United States District Court for Northern District of Ohio, Eastern Division. The long word, CONTERNPORANEOUSLY. With the filing of the above referenced complaint, Ken Kratz is seeking an order from this court adjoining the defendants during the pendency of this action from releasing or causing to be released financial royalties which Ken Kratz is owed pursuant to the express terms of the February 2nd, the thing I just read, 2018 Development and Rights Acquisition Agreement, which is appended to the complaint. The words they use I don't think are necessary, and incorporated by reference herein. They could make this much simpler for people that are bad at reading to read. Upon information and belief and further based upon the prior course of conduct by these defendants on March 31st, 2025, or all substantial portion of monies due and owing to Ken Kratz will instead be released to inferior creditors and other third parties, both related and unrelated to the product. That upon information and belief and based upon Ken Kratz's 25-year training and experience as a courtroom trial attorney, the allegations I have made in the complaint are meritorious, well documented and supported by the available evidence, and are thus likely to result in substantial monetary judgment in Ken Kratz's favor, as prayed for in the complaint. The payment schedule issued by defendant attached and incorporated as Exhibit A indicates defendant is to receive the subject funds on March 31st, 2025. I don't think that happened. For those reasons stated in the complaint, those concerning the defendant's mismanagement of financial resources, if the defendants are not adjoined from releasing any additional monies to third parties, they will lack sufficient funds with which to satisfy any monetary judgment rendered in Ken Kratz's favor. That any hardship the defendants may experience as a result of an order adjoining release of funds would be outweighed by the hardship endured by Ken Kratz, exposing Ken Kratz, it says like me and I'm just reading his name because it's easier, to the risk of inability to collect funds bargained for and earned by Ken Kratz, and that the public interest would be served by granting the requested injunctive relief, which would have a chilling effect upon future sophisticated actors like instant defendants who may be contempting similar malfeasance. And it is signed by Ken Kratz, March 20th, 2025, and my commission expires July 28th, 2025. I think that has to do with the attorney. I am not sure. And the next one is the actual filing, I believe. It is 23 pages long, so strap in and let's get to it. This has everybody's information on it in the United States District Court for the Northern District of Ohio, Eastern Division. Ken Kratz versus Transition Studios and Christopher S. Reck. I assume that's Sean Reck, Ralph McGreevy, John F.E.C.E.K., Andrew M. Hale, and Convicting a Murderer. the Daily Wire. Ooh. So Ken Kratz is against everybody, it appears, in this lawsuit, this civil suit, I guess. Complaint with jury demand, verified request for injunctive relief, oral hearing requested. Now comes the plaintiff, Kenneth R. Kratz, by and through his unsigned counsel, and for his complaint states, alleges, and avers, A-V-E-R-S, as follows. Preliminary statement. Kenneth Kratz brings this cause of action against the defendants, all those names I just read, for multiple instances of breach of contract, unjust enrichment, civil conspiracy, and fraud, as well as for an accounting. Over the course of several years, beginning in early 2017, defendants took advantage of Ken Kratz's, it says plaintiff, but I'm just going to say Ken Kratz, plaintiff's diminished public profile caused by vitriol and hate leveled at plaintiff as a result of a Netflix docuseries titled Making a Murderer, in which Ken Kratz was portrayed as a villain for having faithfully and professionally done his job as a duly elected district attorney in bringing and prosecuting charges against Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey in order to unjustly enrich themselves at Ken Kratz's expense. The civil conspiracy was accomplished when the defendants fraudulently induced Ken Kratz to sign agreements in which plaintiff was promised monies and which defendant, upon and belief, never intended to actually pay Ken Kratz, and in fact to date have not paid Ken Kratz. That first thing I read is pretty damning, but what do I know? I don't know nothing. Towards the people Ken Kratz has filed this against, because they have an agreement signed for this to happen. So at first look, it definitely seems like Ken Kratz has a case here. Plaintiff realized that full breadth and scope of this conspiracy in late 2019 and began expressing his concerns and communications with interested parties relative to the defendants in early 2020, which communications, when brought to the attention of defendants, prompted defendants to begin the process of cutting plaintiff's access to limiting his expectations concerning the very project he had contracted them on, ultimately accumulating in defendants breaching their contractual agreement with plaintiff altogether by leading directly to the instant litigation. Parties to this cause of action: Ken Kratz is an individual. I'm not reading any of this because it's everybody's personal information. Let's just keep scrolling. So the next little bit is just everything we know. I'm not going to read this word for word because it just talks about how Ken Kratz was an elected official from 92 to 2010 and about how he was appointed special prosecutor in the Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey cases. Talks about how Netflix released a 10-part docuseries in 2015 called Making a Murderer. It talks about how public interest and conversation about the case grew to historic levels. The series released, which included a significant number of the 40+ million viewers believing the false narrative advanced by the series. That is, the local officers, including Deputy Andrew Colburn and the prosecuting team led by Ken Kratz, conspired to convict an innocent person, it says junk dealer here, and his 16-year-old nephew, Brendan Dassey. As a result of the Netflix series, hate from the viewers led to threats against Ken Kratz, which eventually led to Ken Kratz's private practice law firm being shuttered. Ken Kratz has received constant threats and attempts to cancel plaintiff's ability to practice law. We know all of that stuff. Due to the attention gathered by Netflix, the series, the plaintiff was contacted and asked to write a book, which he did, which is called Avery, the Case Against Stephen Avery and What Making a Murderer Gets Wrong. We know that. As demand grew for additional content, Ken Kratz signed a development deal with NBC, Universal, and Blumhouse Productions to create develop and sell a Ken Kratz project. I'm shocked that this didn't happen with the popularity of Making a Murderer, even a short miniseries at that point in time. This was like 2018 or something, I believe, 2017 maybe, and a lot of people would still watch it to this day, but a lot of people at that point in time would have jumped all over this. I think NBC dropped the ball there. A Ken Kratz project to a TV or streaming network. Plaintiff, Ken Kratz, provided exclusive trial work, product interviews, and insights as the project created a sizzle reel used to show prospective networks the prosecutor's rebuttal to the allegations raised in the Netflix series. Plaintiff participated in 4 pitch meetings with NBC producers and networks. Plaintiff's agreement with NBC expired on January 31st, 2018. The attempts to sell the developed series to one of several networks proved unsuccessful. I'm surprised that nobody jumped all over that. In January 2018, an attorney by the name of Andrew M. Hale contacted Ken Kratz expressing an interest in developing and producing the Ken Kratz project through defendant Transition Studios in Cleveland, Ohio. Hale claimed that he had served as an executive producer on a previous project, Murder in the Park, where he indicated that he had partnered with defendant Sean Reck to bring that project to Netflix. To convince Ken Kratz to allow his use of exclusive content and to produce a new 10-part docuseries. An offer was made by Hale and his partner, Sean Reck, the owner of the Transition Studios, on January 15th, 2018. The terms of the agreement were reduced to a signed communication entitled Memorandum of Understanding. That's the first thing I read. That was Exhibit 1. The January 15th, 2018 agreement was signed by Sean Reck with a promise to Ken Kratz to present a long-form contract with the same terms on February 1st, 2018. A long-form development rights and acquisition agreement was in fact executed by both parties on or about February 2nd, 2018. The contract was signed by defendant Sean Reck under the name, Christopher S. Reck under the name Sean Reck as a member of defendant Convicting a Murderer, docuseries LLC by Ken Kratz. Upon information and belief, defendant Sean S. Reck is the sole member of Convicting a Murderer docuseries. Plaintiff incorporates by reference, and the defendant, Sean Reck, raised money through loans first on or around February 1st, 2018, and additional loans between 2020 and 2023 to produce the 10-part Convicting a Murderer docuseries. Sean Reck and his agent have consistently refused to identify the lender's terms and dates and the amounts of monies received, what collateral was used to secure the loans, what payment terms there were, what sources of revenue were used to pay back the loans. Upon information and belief, over $3 million was raised by the defendants for the Convicting a Murderer project between 2018 and 2023. Section 5BI of the agreement stated Ken Kratz shall receive a profit of precipitation equal to 15% of the producer's share of net profits, calculated on the same basis as the producer's net profit. As per Section 5C, net profits shall mean any returnable revenue arising from the distribution, merchandising, or any other exploration of the series and or element thereof, including contingent compensation, format fees, bonuses, and royalties, as well as any additional non-returnable sums received by or IRREVOCABLY credited to producer and or any of its agents or representatives for its account as a result of any other exploitation of the property and or any element thereof less expenses. Man, I read a million of these. They're worded so confusing. Expenses shall, someone told me one time these are like, or commented one time that these are like a word salad. I agree. Expenses shall mean a sum equal to any and all actual direct out-of-pocket costs and expenses actually incurred by producer in connection with the development, production, and post-production of the series and its efforts to obtain a series commitment as set forth herein, including but not limited to delivery costs, provided that for the purpose of this calculation the production budget shall not be deemed to exceed $2.5 million and sales commission shall not exceed 12.5%. From the execution of the original agreement dated February 2nd, 2018 to the present, Sean Reck and his agents have failed to identify what, if any, actual direct out-of-pocket costs and expenses have been incurred in the project. Demand for the detailed revenue and expense records have been made of Sean Reck and his agents. Demands have been made by Ken Kratz's counsel to Sean Reck and his team for revenues and expenses records associated with the Convicting a Murderer project. No meaningful response was provided by any of the defendants for over 6 months, amounting to best at bad faith conduct on the part of the defendants. Section 7 of the agreement states Ken Kratz shall be entitled to review and be consulted on the final shooting scripts of the television programs, the motion pictures, or other properties produced, it being understood that further changes to such final shooting scripts may be made by the producer. On October 29th, 2021, attorney for transition Dorothy Richardson provided plaintiff with the following assurances. Though the project isn't completely finished, it is at a point where transition is comfortable starting the sales process. You will have a chance to review the project before it is delivered. Despite numerous inquiries from Ken Kratz to defendants to review the completed series before the release to ensure no errors or omissions in the project, Ken Kratz was denied that opportunity by the defendants. Upon information and belief, the Daily Wire Plus released the Convicting a Murderer 10-part series on their streaming platform in consecutive weeks between September and December 2023. At no time before the release of any of the 10 episodes was plaintiff given an opportunity to review the finished product for errors and omissions. Upon a cursory review of the finished and released Convicting a Murderer project, Ken Kratz has identified a substantial number of errors and omissions in the docuseries. I wonder if they talk about what that is, because I'm very interested in to see what he states was wrong. Although the agreement is silent as to the completion date, Sean Reck represented to Ken Kratz before the execution that the project would be completed by September 2019. The project was not released until September 2023, 4 years later than represented. The delays in the production and completion were not the fault of Ken Kratz. According to direct correspondence from Sean Reck dated December 25th, Christmas Day, 2019, plaintiff relied upon representations as to the project completion date and suffered financial and reputational harm as a result of defendants' failure to comply with the representations upon which plaintiff, Ken Kratz, had relied. After the deal was announced, where Daily Wire Plus had purchased the series and had set it to release in September of 2023, plaintiff was prevented from speaking with executive producers Ben Shapiro and Candace Owens, or with any of the other producers of Convicting a Murderer. After having been guaranteed input before the release of the project, the initial exclusion of plaintiff at the post-production stages consults a bad faith breach of contract on the parts of the defendants. On February 6, 2020, plaintiff transmitted a demand for information regarding the status of the Convicting a Murderer project. Specifically on February 6, 2020, plaintiff again demanded to be updated regarding whether any sales negotiations are underway and what representations have been made to potential buyers, specifically regarding Ken Kratz's participation in the project and the status of the project, how close to completion it is. Defendants have consistently failed to provide any meaningful updates to date. On February 23rd, 2023, plaintiff made the following demand of Sean Reck. I would like to talk to the investors directly to share my ideas directly. Assuming you are not hiding something from them or me, it should go smoothly. I once again demand to know how much money was raised for this project, from whom, what the money was spent on. The defendant responded to that inquiry with the following. There are no investors, just lenders who are all due repayment and royalties. On August 9th, 2019, however, Sean Reck indicated that Brad Owen and his wife are the largest investors. Exhibit 1 sets forth the intent of the parties as to contract terms. The parties has agreed therein that a long-form contract would be drafted with the sales terms as the January 15th, 2018 Memorandum of Understanding. That first thing I read, one of the agreed upon terms in Exhibit 1 was as follows. Producers will advance Ken Kratz $5,000 by March 1st, 2018 towards existing Avery and forthcoming Brendan Dassey adaptation of book rights for scripted films, with $45,000 due to fully execute rights. This must be fully paid by February 1st, 2020. The agreement, dated February 2nd, 2018, neglected to restate the terms for purchase of plaintiff's book rights. Sean Reck assured plaintiff on February 2nd, 2018 that the book rights would be covered in its own future contract, which was never presented for execution. On May 24th, 2019, Sean Reck informed Ken Kratz that he had decided not to pay the $45,000 promised for the book rights, stating that he only purchased an option to buy the rights and the project was opting to not fully execute the deal. As per Section 4 of the agreement, Ken Kratz will be entitled to an end roll screen credit in connection with consulting services performed, the form and placement of which shall be at producer's sole discretion. After the release of Convicting a Murderer, Ken Kratz was given no end roll screen credit for consulting services or in recognition of the massive exclusive work, product, and intellectual property provided by Ken Kratz to the project. As per Section 6, producers will obtain an errors and omissions insurance policy for the series in the minimum of $1 million per occurrence and $3 million in the aggregate, and will name Ken Kratz as additional insured on the policy. Upon release of the project, plaintiff was not named as an insured on the errors and omission policy obtained by Sean Reck for Convicting a Murderer. As a result of those instances of breach of contract by defendants above, plaintiff has been damaged in an amount to be determined at trial, but which amount is expected to exceed $75,000 after the accounting prayed for in Court 6 of this complaint. Plaintiff in Count 2, unjust enrichment. As Section 15 of the agreement, the parties hereby agree to do all further acts and deeds consistent with the terms hereof that may from time to time be reasonably required to confirm the parties' respective rights and obligations. The parties further agree to act in good faith as to not frustrate the intent of the agreement. Doesn't seem like that happened. Beginning in December of 2019, plaintiff Ken Kratz discovered that it was more probable than not that Sean Reck, acting as executive officer for Transition and Convicting a Murderer, used a substantial share of the monies raised for Convicting a Murderer project to support his own lavish lifestyle and to satisfy personal and business debts which were unrelated to the project. On January 19th and January 20th, 2020, Ken Kratz spoke with the executive producer of the project, defendant Hale, by telephone, informing Hale of Ken Kratz's suspicion and provided historical facts to Hale to support the ongoing embezzlement allegations. After Hale performed his own independent investigation, he assured plaintiff that he would fix the problem and not allow Sean Reck to retaliate or punish Ken Kratz for becoming a whistleblower as to defendants' potential felonious activities. Interesting. Agreements were made for a face-to-face meeting to resolve the issue in January of 2020. After informing Sean Reck of plaintiff's allegations, executive producer Hale never spoke to Ken Kratz or to Ken Kratz's legal counsel, allowing Sean Reck to retaliate against plaintiff for the duration of the contract. After learning of Sean Reck's unlawful behavior, Hale signed an agreement drafted by attorney for transition and convicting a murderer, Dorothy Richardson, extraditing himself from the project, allowing Ken Kratz and all of the other project investors and stakeholders to suffer financial jeopardy and losses due to the misappropriation of project funds. This is actually pretty crazy. Affirmative actions by Hale have prevented Ken Kratz from determining Hale's involvement in fraud and breach of contract, and any statuses of limitations as relating to Hale should be told as of January 31st, 2020. On January 29th, 2020, Ken Kratz notified executive producer Hale, attorney for transition, and Dorothy Richardson and Sean Reck as to embezzlement concerns, demanding that the project perform an accounting or forensic audit to determine what, if any, misappropriation of funds have occurred. Specifically, plaintiff indicates as follows: based upon what I perceive to be the possible misappropriation of funds, the possible theft of intellectual property, a resurfacing of Mr. Sean Reck's drug and alcohol addiction, and the apparent unwillingness of any response by Mr. Reck, Mr. Hale, or the attorney Richardson to account for the monies raised for the Avery project, the monies expended in furtherance of the Avery project, or other financial irregularities. I am withdrawing from the Convicting a Murderer project. On January 30th, 2020, attorney Dorothy Richardson, who self-identified as the attorney for Sean Reck personally, informed plaintiff that you are not legally entitled to unilaterally terminate the agreement, unilaterally, terminate the agreement, or to rescind any of the rights granted. You are not permitted under the agreement to withdraw from. You must do it. I guess if you have a contract, I don't know, but it seems like they broke the agreements of that contract. You are not permitted under the agreement to withdraw from the project or to take any materials provided to the prosecutor in connection with the project. Also, you are not permitted to shop your project to any third parties. Further, the agreement does not require the producer to provide any accounting of expenses until and unless the series has been sold to a third party, which it did, nor does it require the producer to disclose the amount of investments fund raised. If you proceed with a press release tomorrow, or if you attempt to transfer any of the rights granted under the agreement, or if you permit the use of any rights granted for any purpose that would impair use, therefore, by the producer, you will be in breach of the agreement. Defendants have continually failed to provide project status or other relevant updates despite frequent and periodic demands from Ken Kratz. As an example, on February 1st, 2024, the plaintiff wrote to Sean Reck and his attorney, "Please provide a meaningful update regarding the project. My question to attorney Richardson is whether an audit or an accounting of the money received by Sean Reck has been performed with oversight of what the Avery money was spent on. If this audit has not been conducted, why not? As a result of those instances of unjust enrichment by the defendants above, Ken Kratz has been damaged in an amount to be determined at trial, but which is expected to be to exceed $75,000 after the accounting paid in Court 6 of this complaint." Count 2, conversation of Kenneth R. Kratz's intellectual property. Exclusive work product and intellectual property regarding the preparations for and prosecution of State versus Avery and State versus Dassey were provided to Sean Reck by plaintiff and by those individuals directed by plaintiff to provide additional reports and files. And the exclusive Avery materials proved so valuable to Sean Reck that the plaintiff's work, product, and intellectual property served as collateral for all of the defendants' Avery's project loans. Section 10 of the agreement guaranteed each party has not made and will not make any grant, assessment, commitment, or do any permit any act which might conflict with or impair any of the rights granted to the parties hereunder. Ken Kratz alleges that the transfer of Ken Kratz's intellectual property rights to a third party violated those expressed terms of the agreement with the defendants. Upon information and belief in or around December 2018, transition employee Brenda Schuler gave exclusive case materials and insights to attorney Michael Griesbach, directly leading to the filing of a lawsuit in federal court against Netflix by Andrew Colburn in December 2018. Griesbach is a competitor of plaintiff, having written at least 2 books on the Stephen Avery cases. Upon information and belief, Schuler and Griesbach also colluded to exclude plaintiff from the Netflix civil case filings, all to plaintiff's financial and reputational detriment. On January 29, 2020, plaintiff sent correspondence to Dorothy Richardson, counsel for Sean Reck, demanding to know the defendant's role in transferring his intellectual property. I'm demanding to know whether your client was involved in or complicit with the theft of my intellectual property, the stuff I produce or developed most specifically for this project. You will know it's my stuff because I can provide all of the earlier drafts of those materials that I created. The early drafts of those materials is how you know it's a document that you can prove was yours, but later stolen and either sold or given away to a competitor. The redistribution of any of those copyright protected and exclusive materials of mine to any third party, much less one of our competitors, is theft in criminal court and conversation in a tort claim. The distinction is for your client when he asks how he can be charged with both criminal theft and be sued for civil conversation. With the same facts, I'm sure he'll be told why his company, and not just the employee agent who he allowed to leak the materials. Her name is Brenda Schuler. Her husband owns an international company. If you are considering whether to implead someone, if your client won't answer that, whether he helped Brenda F me and my reputation further. How do you expect me to continue down this path with him? Defendants contractually became Ken Kratz's agents with respect to the protection of Ken Kratz's intellectual property. Specifically, Section 14 of the agreement states as follows: producers may prosecute any action, and Ken Kratz's IREVOCABLY grants to producer full power and authority to do so in Ken Kratz's name and to take any and all steps as producer. In producer's sole discretion, may elect to restrain and prevent others from so using such rights. Ken Kratz further agrees to execute, acknowledge, and deliver to producer any and all further documents, assessments, and other instruments in form approved by counselor for producer, necessary or expedited to carry out and EFFECUATE the purposes and intent of the parties as herein expressed and or as deemed necessary or desirable to establish or defend producer's title to any created hereunder or rights granted hereunder. If Ken Kratz shall fail to so execute and deliver any such assessment or other instruments within 10 days of being presented, producers shall deem to be and Ken Kratz IRREVOCBABLY appoints producer and the true and lawful attorney in fact of Ken Kratz to execute and deliver any and all such assignments as the other instruments in the name of Ken Kratz, which right coupled with an interest. Producers shall provide Ken Kratz with copies of any instruments or documents executed, verified, acknowledged, and delivered by producer Ken Kratz behalf hereunder, provided that producer's inadvertent failure to provide such copies will not be deemed a breach hereunder. Hereunder is used a lot. Sean Reck has denied any knowledge of his employee, Brenda Schuler, having transferred plaintiff's intellectual property without plaintiff's consent on February 9th, 2019. However, Sean Reck wrote to Convicting a Murderer legal counsel communicating the following discovery. One of our producers, Brenda Schuler, has amassed thousands of pages of data, evidence, photos, videos, transcripts while researching for a couple of authors who wrote books on the Avery Dassey situation. She has shared the library with us, and I just learned she shared it with Andrew Colburn's defamation lawyers. Interesting. As a result of those instances of conversation of plaintiff's intellectual property by defendants above, Ken Kratz has been damaged in an amount to be determined at trial. That's the $75,000 again. Count 4, fraud. Plaintiff, Ken Kratz, incorporates by reference each and every allegation contained in paragraphs 1 through 60 as fully rewritten herein, fraudulent representations by the defendants to induce Ken Kratz to participate and then remain involved with the project, included without limitation. On January 7th, 2018, Sean Reck wrote to plaintiff asking to be given an opportunity to make the Convicting a Murderer docuseries. I believe we are the perfect production company to make this docuseries clear your name, correct the record, and restore some of the things you lost as a result of making a murderer, including your financial security. If you entrust us with your story, we'll be honored to deliver a well-made, persuasive, clinical dissection of making a murderer with some fascinating human interest stories woven in for good measure. The length to which supporters went to personally hurt on your side. Sean Reck represented to Ken Kratz that Convicting a Murderer project was to have an Emmy award-winning director, producer, Brandon Kimber, overseeing the project. On February 6, 2020, Ken Kratz notified the attorney for Convicting a Murderer project, I've told you that Sean Reck has failed to provide notice of project status. Sean Reck hid the fact that Brandon Kimber, the Emmy Award-winning DP for Transition Studios, had left Sean Reck's employ. Why wasn't Ken Kratz informed of Kimber's departure in a timely manner so that Ken Kratz could determine if he wished to leave the project? Clearly, the initial representations made to Ken Kratz about who was making the project, Brandon Kimber, with his award so prominently displayed by Sean Reck. Without Reck's false representations and omissions of relevant updates regarding Brandon Kimber, Ken Kratz would have not continued to participate in the project, or at the very least, would have publicly distanced himself from the project. Defendant was told on many occasions during the pre-production, production, and post-production phases of the project that Schuler should have no direct involvement in the production of Convicting a Murderer. Representing the basis for his clear position, Ken Kratz communicated to the defendants what continued involvement does Brenda Schuler have with this project. Has Brenda Schuler been given any authority other than fact-checker as represented by Sean Reck? Is Brenda Schuler a producer on Convicting a Murderer? Will Brenda Schuler have any further access to Convicting a Murderer materials? Or will she be at all involved in this project at any point in the future? I reiterate, I believe Brenda Schuler has stolen intellectual property from me and transferred same without my consent. I made the same allegation regarding the Convicting a Murderer materials since I was told that Brenda Schuler had no authority to transfer, sell, or give away materials either created or gathered by Ken Kratz, any of his agents, or the materials gathered in direct advancement of the Convicting a Murderer project. Defendant continually notified plaintiff that Brenda Schuler is nothing more than a fact checker on the project and is not a producer. Ken Kratz alleges that without the defendant's false representations regarding this fact, plaintiff would not have continued to participate in the project, or at very least would have distanced himself publicly from the project. Indeed, upon and belief, Brenda Schuler had no education, training, or experience in film making prior to 2018. Brenda Schuler has served as plaintiff's Ken Kratz's fact checker on Avery-related projects, including his book and his own Avery docuseries project developed and shopped by NBC Universal Studios with collaboration from Blumhouse Productions between 2016 and 2017. As such, Brenda Schuler was incompetent to be given producer status on the Convicting a Murderer project. Brenda Schuler, in fact, was named a producer of the Convicting a Murderer project by Sean Reck as early as January 2019. Despite having no filmmaking background, Brenda Schuler is listed in the end roll screen credits on IMDb as a producer of the Convicting a Murderer project. Between 2020 and 2023, Sean Reck, in conjunction with his agents, made false representations to media sources about the true status of the Convicting a Murderer project, including intentional misrepresentations as to how close the Convicting a Murderer project was to completion. Plaintiff alleges that without Sean Reck's false representations to the media regarding the expected date of completion, plaintiff would not have continued to participate in the project, or at the very least would have publicly distanced himself from the project, given Sean Reck's continued public deceptions. Defendant's unlawful conduct, as alleged above, constitute a malicious combination involving two or more persons to injure plaintiff in a way not competent for one alone, constituting a civil conspiracy. Specifically, upon information and belief, defendants conspired as individuals and under the AUSPICES of the corporate structure of Defendants Transition Studios, and in the case of Sean Reck, also under of the defendant Convicting a Murderer, to engage in the unlawful conduct above to plaintiff's detriment and the defendant's benefit, as evidence not only by the unlawful actions themselves, but by the refusal each of the defendants to communicate with Ken Kratz as to project updates and other project status requests, except through legal counsel and or by way of OBFUSCATION, as alleged above. Count 6, accounting. A business and or FIDUCIARY relationship existed between Ken Kratz and the defendants. Plaintiff is owed money by the defendants which remain unknown, and which monies defendants have failed to remit to plaintiff. The amount plaintiff is owed cannot be calculated without accounting. Defendants are, upon information and belief, in possession of information necessary for the calculation, and have denied Ken Kratz access to such that plaintiff would be able to determine the amount of money owed. Ken Kratz remedies are potential inadequate in order to fully pursue his claims against defendants. Additionally, plaintiff further states that unless they are adjoined from doing so, plaintiff believes that defendants will move ABSCOND or hide assets, which will cause plaintiff Ken Kratz irreparable harm. So that was a long one. If you're here with me to the end, thanks for watching. If you're not, you won't see this, but I completely understand. But so that's the lawsuit that Ken Kratz is bringing against the people that made Convicting a Murderer. And honestly, this is just me seeing the first couple of things here, and it seems like from the law degree I received from Netflix that Ken Kratz has a case here. It definitely seems like so far that they didn't live up to the contract. But what do you think? Let me know. Leave some comments below. I hope you're having a good day, and I will see you again soon.